You're listening to the Beyond Sundays podcast, where we share stories of God's faithfulness with people just like you. Today, we pick up where we left off last week with Zach Vasser, Reece and Rodney Hogue. If you missed last week's episode, definitely go back and listen when you get the chance. Today, we dive straight into the role of spiritual fathers and mothers, but you better buckle up, guys, because this conversation goes somewhere that cut me to my absolute core when it comes to asking some really important questions, like, who do we really desire to be? What are we actually devoting our lives to? And how will the world remember us? Y'all, this is such an important conversation about maturity and legacy. You may want to take notes. I know I did. Plus, I've got some really fun and exciting news to share with you at the end of the podcast that I'm pretty pumped about. So let's get to it.
Being a father is just simply who I am. It's what I do. It's what I carry. I don't really relate to people differently. Some people pursue a relationship with me. In other words, they pull on that, what I carry. And for a lot of people, the Lord gives me the freedom, says yes, then I spend the time with them, imparting the things that I am and what I carry. It's who I am. God trained me a lot at being a father by giving me 3 sons. And so I learned a lot about being a father. I also learned about being a father because it dawned on me one day that, these men in my life were spiritual fathers and mothers. There were some mothers there too that I didn't really acknowledge as spiritual moms and dads. But I remember when I would come to them and says, you're not just like my own physical father and mother. You're not just my physical mom and dad. You're my spiritual mom and dad. And there was a shift that happened when that happened. It's like I'm walking the inheritance that my dad carried. I remember before my dad passed and he died of lymphoma, I remember the days that the Lord, his days were coming close, and we'd already been to the doctor the last time. He says, I've almost killed you 3 times, so I'm just going to make you comfortable. And he would pass within a month. And I remember, as we got home, I said, Dad, what are you thinking about this? He says, well, first of all, he says, I don't care about dying. That's always the good thing, going to heaven. Who can complain about that, right? He says, what always bothered me is that I have some promises that God gave me that have not been fulfilled. Mm. He said, that's what bothers me. I don't care about dying. I mean, that's the plus part. But that's what irritates me. And I remember like the next day that he called my wife and I in, and he laid his hands on us. And he said, those promises that God gave me, those were the word of the Lord, and those words were still good. And neither I will fulfill those or you will fulfill those, but they will be fulfilled.
Absolutely.
And I remember hours before my dad passed, I was in California, the church I was pastoring. He was here in Texas. Hours before he passed, as I was walking just into the hallway, I felt the weight of his calling fall on me. And I started to weep and weep and weep. Dick couldn't figure out what was going on. And hours later, he passed. Mm-hmm. And I tell you, the favor that I walk in today, and a lot that I'm experiencing today, I know is an inheritance from him.
Yeah.
I just received what he carried. I added to what God put on me, and what God put on him, and I get to carry. And then my sons and my spiritual sons get to carry what I carry. Mm-hmm. The weight of all of that. And the impact is massive. I mean, I didn't say I was humble, but you're the one who said that, Zach.
I know, it's true.
But, it's like I'm living in a life of obscurity that nobody knows who I am. I mean, it's like you're talking about this conference with Bill. So I did this conference with Bill and Randy at Andrew Womack's church, in
Randy Clark.
Mm-hmm. And I remember we did it at the end of March, and I'm walking through like nobody knows me. Nobody knows me, and like nobody's, I'm not having a line. I'm like this, and and I'm just like, I love that. And they go, you're feeling pretty good, and they go, yeah. I says it's because I haven't spoken yet.
That's awesome.
That's a really interesting question you ask, Zach, and that is, I'm just thinking about over the last year and a half since that meeting in the chapel that we're talking about, and I will confess that I want to. I think I am part of the time, some of the time, doing the spiritual fathering part of my world, doing it naturally, just being who I am. But I'm still having to work on that one, because what happened on that day and multiple times since then is, if we're going to move from accidental to intentional, that means that my awareness of what's going on now, my awareness of that relationship with so many that I have been fathering, if you will, over the years, and some others that may become a part of that, when I'm aware of so much more now. I'm aware of them. I'm watching them. I'm listening. I'm looking, and I'm aware that even when I'm not doing anything, even when I'm talking to somebody else, the eyes of many are. So it's become.
You're feeling the weight of that responsibility.
Absolutely. That's exactly, just as you said, that's what's happening to me. And so learning how to walk in that awareness and to see the seriousness of it, yet not change the way I am in terms of, then it becomes not, it doesn't work. So
controlling and all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that weight is a natural God-given weight. Like, I can remember having both our daughters. I was not saved and did not know Jesus, but the second that first one entered the world, I felt that weight.
The weight
There
of
is
that
a
responsibility.
New responsibility in my life in every kind of way.
Yeah.
And so this is just all by design. It's not like, I had this revelation and I know Jesus now, and I'm going to walk out into the kingdom and carry the inheritance everywhere I go. And now all of a sudden there's a responsibility of being a dad. Actually, there's billions of dads walking around with that same responsibility, who have no idea who Jesus is, or may be in a whole different faith.
Yeah.
Or believe nothing. Maybe atheist. I don't know.
And that's one of the reasons a lot of men and women don't want to become spiritual moms and dads, because they don't want the responsibility.
Right.
And it is a responsibility. But you have to be willing to accept and receive that responsibility. And so Randy has shifted. He's changed the way that he sees himself, because of the way that he sees others. Is like, oh no, these are people. I'm no longer. In other words, when you become a father, you're committed now to relationship. Where before, like,
exactly.
I didn't have to have a relationship with you.
Right.
I can actually just maybe mentor you, maybe kind of, we can maybe have a little discipleship meeting, and I can just give you information. I give you some how-tos, and you'd be just fine. But all of a sudden, I realized when I function as a father, then there's more. I'm actually committed to a relationship. And for a lot of men and women, that's kind of, they don't do relationship very well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the freedom in it is like, we're not talking about counseling.
No.
Oh, no.
All really I've experienced.
Or attending a class.
Yeah.
For sure,
While all
that.
those things are great, that's not what we're talking about. Like, I think what we're talking about is me as a son seeking after a dad. I'm going to allow this man to fully know me. That's the uncomfortable part.
Right.
On the father's side of the fence, it's going to take some time to do that.
Yeah.
But a dad's not ever going to maybe answer all my questions. Jesus didn't answer hardly any questions. He told stories and asked questions back and just presented himself as the ultimate son. And that's all the Father really is doing. I mean, haven't had some kind of, I mean, what typically happens if I visit with either of these guys is later, like it'll be like 2 nights later, and then something will just hit me in my spirit, like,
Oh yeah.
Like I can tell you one time, probably 6 months ago, I was actually sitting on my back porch, and I was all by myself. One of the girls was on trampoline, and I think I'd met with Rodney probably a couple weeks back or a few days back, and I just hit something, it hit me. Like, what is that? And the Lord goes, the last thing you want to do, Zach, is die and say, man, I was a really good brother to a whole lot of people. That's not on your goal sheet anymore. So I'm a former coach. I've been in a lot of huddles. I've been on a lot of teams. I've been a really good brother before Jesus and even with Jesus. We get guys in fire teams at boot camp. There's a band of brothers. There's, I can say a lot of guys probably would say, man, he's a good brother. Well, that's great, but that's not the goal.
It's good.
I want to be, there's no legacy in being a brother.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's just, that's it. That dies. But the weight of that was like, oh. But I appreciate it because it took the conversation, the time to get to know. And then the Lord comes and does these things.
You have Absalom. He was the son of David, and he rebelled. And it says that Absalom did not have any children. He didn't have any sons or daughters. He didn't have any legacy, so he built himself a monument. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to have a remembrance. And that's where a lot of people are. How is the world going to remember you? And for a lot of people, they're building monuments. They're building things to say, listen, this is what I did in my life, and this is a monument. But but nobody remembers Absalom. But then David had a legacy.
This is good.
Yeah, I know.
David had a legacy. The Messiah came from his legacy. Solomon.
Right.
It's like David had a legacy. Do you want to be remembered by a legacy, or do you want to be remembered by a monument that's going to eventually die? It's eventually going to be defaced.
Mm-hmm. This was the conversation. And you're just like, oh. And mind you, not only did I coach for 10 years and devote a lot of my life to that and find a false identity in it, I also was in sales and networking for 7 years. And in that world, it's extremely rank-based. It's very performance-driven. I met someone that led me to Jesus. I could give you a whole category of how it was the greatest thing in season of mine and my wife Rachel's life. But also, we got put on stages. We got put in front of a lot of people, and my flesh liked that. That felt cool. It was neat. I was getting to speak into adults, not just kids. So I was getting taken through a process. But now, like, after getting the fullness of Jesus and starting to walk out this kingdom man and who I really desire to be, that obscurity is something I heard a mentor say years ago, and that's why that sits in me. But then also, I just have found a distaste almost for that statue way of life.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like in guys who I've watched devote their lives to that place of an Absalom, like, man, guys, it's just better than that. You're only getting you think this is the fullness, but it is an extremely limited life. There's nothing that you're leaving behind to give. And so, man, it's funny when you look back on your life. Everyone listening can do this. If you'll just think back in like seasons, you'll see these patterns that you've gotten into, and you'll see, another thing too, and I think we should probably go here, is a lot of times I don't know that, and you and I have talked about this. There are some people who may be getting spiritually fathered from a distance.
Yeah.
Reece mentioned people in, proximity. He's talking to somebody and, how do you function? And, we can probably get into orphan thinking is where we can go in some of this. But because someone's not giving you that devoted time doesn't mean they're not spiritually fathering you. Yeah. If your heart's seeking this person from that sort of way, let me tell you this, you could be getting spiritually fathered right now listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, there's no limitations. Yeah. Now, I would say, the closer you can get to having a relationship with somebody to be fully known, there's a big process in that. Mm-hmm. But can you speak into some of that? I mean, just how you've seen some of that play out?
I sat down one time and began to write down, okay, how many people do I know of right now who actually, when they have a conversation with me, actually call me a spiritual father, that I am a spiritual father to them, and they actually see me as a father, they function as a father. Well, Jack Taylor had a couple hundred, but I mean, there are about 50 in my life right now. And I mean, like this afternoon, I'm going to have a conversation with a person who has a ministry in Queens, New York, and her husband. I'm fathering them. I mean, it's just I spent Monday with a man in Switzerland, who is the head of HR of one of the major drug companies in the world. Okay, I'm his spiritual father. I mean, my sons and daughters do everything. They're presidents of companies, pastors of churches. They're just people inside. They're just people I have relationship with. But I also know that I will go to some place, and I go to Global Awakening. Okay, I'm going to go next week, and I'm going to go do some teaching in their ministry school that they have for the summer intensive. But it's like this: some of those people there, I don't know that they see me as a father, but then they'll come up and they'll hug me like as a spiritual child. I mean, so I know there are people out there that see me as a father, relate to me as a father, receive the things I give as a father that I really don't have personal connection, relationship with. And I think that's, for me, that's one of the ways that I grew is I began to see some of these people as a father. When I saw them as a father and began to relate to them as a son, and one of the ways I did this by serving these people in a way that I can. As I served them, I'm going to be. If I'm your son, I'm just going to serve you as my father in any way that I can, and that's what I did. I began to receive, I think, the things that they carried. I received Jack Taylor as a spiritual father. Okay, our families were close, but I didn't have a daily connection with him.
Right.
I didn't. I mean, I had a cell phone.
You probably read his books. You probably dove into all his content.
Yeah, before I really got to know him well. I mean, he was his family and my family. They were close. They were always a part of each other's. My dad's in his first book he wrote, The Key to Triumphant Living. That he wrote in the '60s. I mean, that's how close the families are. But I didn't see him as a father then. But I began to receive him as a father. I never went to one of those sons meetings that he would have. But, he knew I saw him as a father. But still, I think from a distance, yeah. In other words, look at the people. I'm going to receive you as a father. I think the thing is, the difference is that you can receive them as a teacher. In other words, because sometimes people follow teachings, they follow doctrines, they follow, teachers. But it's like, what role does that person have in your life?
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah.
Because I'd say John Eldridge.
Oh, sure. Yeah, John absolutely was that to me, more at a distance, even being when I would go to a boot camp up in Colorado. I'm one of 450 guys there, so there wasn't much time for he and I to have much one-on-one. But from a distance in a big room, talking on the phone, being a part of a podcast, whatever, it was that way. In fact, I just talked to one of our sons-in-laws who works with John now and has for several years, where he and I are going to arrange a time for me to get a chance, literally, to go up there and sit in front of John and just tell him what role he has played in my life, not only certainly as a mentor, but as a spiritual father. And he probably has no idea that was really going on, because he's got a bunch of men that will say that to him. But I'm going to get a chance to do that. And I think it's really important that happens, and I believe it will.
That's awesome.
Well, Sarah, so
If you could see my face right now, I'm just sitting here going, I'm going to have to soak for a while
Yeah.
to let this really sink deep.
Yeah.
Because there have been 100 thoughts I've had, one of which has to do with my role as like a daughter receiving the role of, well, I have spiritual mothers in my life, but kind of doing what you did, Zach, of going, I receive you as a spiritual mother in my life, not asking for us to meet every week or anything like that. I'm just saying there are things I see in you. I mean, and everything in the kingdom flows through relationships. So there are things I see in you that I want in my life because I want them not just for me, but for others.
Yeah.
For my daughters.
And they want that for you.
Yeah. The two words I kept hearing when it comes to sons and fathers and daughters and mothers would be access on the part of the father or mother, like giving access, right?
Yep.
And then on the role of the son or the daughter, vulnerability of going, this is who I am right now, but I want to become all that God has destined for me to become in fullness of who he desires me to be on this side of heaven, right?
Absolutely.
I'm going to have to sit for a while.
One of the things that you have to look for when you're looking for spiritual moms and dads is that you have to really look for people who love you in where you are and don't really try to put a performance thing on you. It's like as a parent, I love my children when they're 2 and I love them when they're 10. I love them in every stage that they're in. I love every stage. I love them in every stage. I'm not wanting to be in a different stage. I'm loving them in every stage that they have. That's a true parent, right? A true spiritual parent is one who loves everybody in every stage that they are. He loves them in their immaturity, loves them when they're mature, loves them. They love them. An older brother and sister basically has very little toleration for somebody who's not as mature as they are. They are in competition with them as well. It's like you'll have somebody who has a position, like in a church as a pastor or something like this, but somebody anointed comes up and as they rise up, they have to push them back down because they cannot handle somebody who is as gifted or more anointed. A true father and mother says, that is amazing, and they'll become their cheerleader and says, you go past me, you run past me, you do more than I ever did. Mm-hmm. And they find their joy in those people not only coming up to be equal with them, but actually getting the spotlight, even doing more. They celebrate that, and they find their joy in their sons and daughters actually rising up and coming into their destiny. And they actually just able to take the back seat and just say, that's my kid. That's mine.
That's good.
Look at that person right there. Because they're not competing against them.
Yeah.
And they're not works oriented. They're not like, trying to do things to find favor. They're not trying to, or it's not about, obedience. It's all about relationship. You look like you were going to say something.
No, I'm like Sarah. I get the benefit to sit in these conversations sometimes, and it's just crazy.
It's good.
It is good.
I was just thinking also, you mentioned that word, and I think you did too, Rodney, this orphan word. And this is about another 3 podcast topic if we just start talking about the orphan thing, orphan spirit. The huge part of that journey beginning in maturing as a son to become a spiritual father means you get to allow Holy Spirit to reveal to you all the ways you have been living with an orphan thinking as opposed to a son or daughter thinking. And it's like, and we've talked about orphan spirit at boot camp and other teaching for 10 stinking years. And it's just like now I kind of had to start all dang over. And, cause the Lord's beginning to show me even more things. And I'm thinking, stop. I know.
Yeah.
But it is that awareness word that we're talking. That is it. And so but what's cool is now I can talk about that and receive that and even begin to teach that now because it's a part of a relationship scenario. And we're talking about a journey of maturing as a son or a daughter.
Yeah.
And in the maturing process, you're receiving the teaching direct from the Father or from a Rodney Hogue or someone else. And I know that it's for my good. I know that it's something I need to hear. And because I'm really know that I'm not an orphan at all, I can hear it differently. And so it goes into a good place in my heart instead of just making me feel guilty for the 1,000th time.
That's good.
That I wasn't doing doing it well.
You've embraced the spirit of adoption.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
One thing, this happened to me a handful of years ago with that particular word, and it was through boot camps. And usually when you get a topic given to you to teach, then God starts working on you in it. So I've had the joy of getting to talk about posing, and that was great. And I've had the joy of identity and freedom, but in all that concept of adoption, the truth of adoption, that I am fully in this family. And actually, and I think you may have been the one that told us this at some point. Like you can't unadopt someone. Even in our state, right?
Legally, if you adopt, you're committed.
Yeah, it's easier for me to give my daughter. It's legally easier for me and Rachel to write our daughter out of our family.
Yeah.
Than it would be had I adopted a child to then legally unadopt them.
That's exactly right.
So let this adoption thing sink in really deep as you're listening. This is the thing. I mean, Jesus came here to destroy the works of the devil. He came here to give us freedom. He came here to forgive us. He came here to, all the different things we could talk about. But the adoption into the family, man, that's the thing. That is the place. Because the truth is, there's not really anything. When you are operating from that place, it's not a bad thing to be a good performer, to perform well, or to produce results, or to be competitive, or to win, or to, you know what I mean? But just what happens is your strength doesn't come from that any longer. Your motivation doesn't come from that any longer. I'm not losing sleep over it any longer. You're listening to a recovering performance-aholic. I mean, there ain't nothing like coaching Texas high school football, and every Friday night, 5,000 people screaming at you, and I mean, I could go on and on. Like you're just wound and bound up in that place. But when it's no longer about that, and it's about raising up people through adversities, and it's about the failures, that being an okay thing. Actually, it can be a great thing. I could just go on and on. You just begin to see the bigger picture. There's actually a video that went out yesterday. I saw the Oklahoma softball girls. They're like some uncharted success. I don't even think about softball. Praise God, my kids don't ever play softball. No offense if your kids are into softball, but man, that's a lot. Their perspective on that, you can tell this team has a kingdom perspective, and it's because their coach is functioning as a mother, and there's a relationship there that's bigger than their success.
That's good.
But what's awesome is they're extremely successful, and isn't that funny how that still plays out?
Jesus came to reveal the Father to a world full of orphans.
Yeah.
And I remember, it's like the day it dawned on me when I was senior pastor at a church in California. Like, I'm pastoring a church full of orphans. And I think, how do I get them out of that orphan thinking and get them into functioning, as Randy said, with a spirit of adoption? That's a huge challenge. But that's really what we're talking about here. If I will learn how to function as a father or learn how to function as a son in the natural realm, then I'm able to move and fully embrace that in the spirit realm with our Heavenly Father.
So you're saying do the natural first.
We receive Him as a Heavenly Father, but our thinking's not there.
Okay.
Transformation takes place by the renewing of our mind.
Right.
And we have to have in God encounters receiving Him as our Father. I can intellectually know this. I can intellectually know that God is my Father, that I have a spirit of adoption. I can make those declarations, and I can doctrinally, theologically, I can basically come into an agreement with that, but it's not a part of my identity of who I really am. I can declare it's a part of my identity, but my declared identity may not be my true identity. Mm-hmm. I may actually be functioning in a counterfeit identity or a false identity of who I'm really not. But yet, and I have the right words, and I can say the right words.
It's like fake it till you make it.
Yes.
You're right.
But in which are good to declare over ourselves. But there has to come a time where in my soul, I know it well. Mm-hmm. I'm a son. I'm a daughter. I am fully adopted into the family of God. Mm-hmm. That story with the father and the two sons. One son was blinded by rebellion, okay? But the older brother was blinded by religion. Mm-hmm. Religion is that process of trying to earn what you already possess. He in his mindset, he thought, okay, I'm trying to earn my father's favor. We know this by that language at the end, where he's upset that the father did through a party. It's like you're rewarding bad behavior. Well, no, he's not. He's just embracing him as a son. It's not based upon behavior. When are you going to figure this one out?
Yeah.
You're a son by relationship, not by your activity.
That's good.
He said, I have worked all my life, I've worked hard for you. I've never disobeyed anything you've asked me to do, and yet you did not give me even a goat to share with my friends. What was he waiting for? He was waiting to be rewarded for his work. He was waiting for a goat. He was waiting for the father to recognize him and to reward him as an obedient son. And the words of the father is right after that are so significant. The father says, son, you and I are close. And then he said, everything I have is yours. In other words, he said, don't you realize that fatted calf we're killing, that was your calf. Mm-hmm. We could have ate that calf last week if you'd asked for it, but you never asked because you lived like a servant, you thought like a servant, you never asked for that calf. That was your calf. You're not thinking that as a son, I can actually ask extravagantly because I have a father that wants to give extravagantly. But yet I'm waiting to be rewarded. So we live our whole life in performance. That's what he lived in the house. He lived on the farm. But yet he lived like a servant, not like a son on the farm. So you can actually live in the Father's house. You can actually go to church, be a part of the family of God, and still have a performance mindset, being that older brother, and miss out on your inheritance because you're waiting to be rewarded rather than learning to ask for what is available to you. I mean, heaven is available to us if we just know how to ask in an extravagant way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
I want to add this in Luke 15, right where Rodney's talking about. It's in verse 30. After he's upset, he says, look, these many years I've served you. I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat. In verse 30, then the oldest son says, but when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf. The dad's response to the son that said, when this son of yours came, the dad's response, it says in verse 31, and he said to him, son, you are always with me. In other words, what this older son was trying to do was remove himself from this family. Your son did this. His response was, my son. He just simply drew him back in.
Right.
It wasn't even about all the teachings of all this, that tension of when we get angry and we feel like we should deserve this and earn this and we get in this way of thinking
that
with entitlement of, well, he did this and how come this isn't happening? The father heart is always just really still talking to our sonship. Because we can easily get in this way of thinking,
absolutely,
of just the comparison. Let's talk about social media and why is this person getting to this, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And God's heart is always my son, my daughter. However hard you want to push yourself away, his nature is to draw you back in. You are a part of this family. You are adopted. In other words, you cannot be unadopted here. You're here. You're in.
Right.
Like it or not, you're a part.
Right. Sarah, you used a great word. I love the word access.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And there's a whole lot to that. My good friend, Shelley Presley, who I get to be.
Who cut our hearts out last night.
Oh,
if you're not
imagine-
going
I
to the
imagine.
Kingdom Parenting class, I don't know how
It's the
soon
deal.
this
Yeah.
hits, but get to the Kingdom Parenting. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No. I get to be along with your daddy. And
Yeah,
my daddy
yeah.
gets to be daddy-in-law get to be spiritual dad to this gal. But we have a lot of fun giving each other grief. But Shelley told me a few years ago. She said, Reece, that what we're talking about here is we have access to everything that the Father has already given us. We just don't know that we have.
It's good.
Because in the spiritual realm, in the real life, in the real relationship, which is a spiritual relationship, much more than just what we're doing here on the earth, is that all that we need, all that we have is already there. We just don't know that we have it. We haven't realized that I have access to this inheritance, and if I want it, I can go get it, and the Father knows exactly when and how to give it to us. But it's not like we're earning it or we're trying to get somewhere or to get something that we don't have yet, and we already have it. We're just learning how to access it. And when we learn that, then it's, oh my goodness, the fun really begins.
It's all related, isn't it?
It's absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I
absolutely
think about
that.
the word authority as you are saying all that too.
Well, thank you guys so much for all of the wisdom and then just the kingdom wisdom that y'all shared today. I said it earlier, I'm going to say it again. I'm going to have to sit and listen to this again and just soak in it with the Lord. But thank you for being the spiritual fathers that you all are to our body and to so many people in your sphere of influences. Thank you guys so very much. I know I said this several times already, but don't you just have to sit and soak in some of this? I mean, for me personally, I want this. I want this so deep in me, and I want it for you too. You know, at the end of our lives, don't we want to leave a legacy? Our prayer, and may our prayer be, God, show us, teach us how to carry what's already ours. Help us to receive what you've already given and embrace the spirit of adoption and function as sons and daughters who are maturing believers. Y'all, let's carry the inheritance we've already been given while also receiving from the spiritual mothers and fathers in our lives today. Okay, so I mentioned a fun project that I've been working on with Zach, and I'm excited to finally announce. Well, I wish I had a drum roll here, but that's okay. The Beyond Sundays podcast is launching a video podcast mini-series available only on YouTube. Well, you may be asking, Sarah, what's that? Well, it's a podcast that has audio and video, so you guys will be able to see the conversations within these mini-series instead of just listening. How cool is that? I'm going to be honest, though, I have no idea how many of these I can actually pull off or how often we'll be able to launch video podcasts. But I can tell you that I do have another mini-series project in the works with another amazing pastor on staff. This first mini-series is hosted by Zach Vasser as he sits down with some key leaders within men's ministry here at Beltway Park to talk more deeply about the things we've covered in the last 2 podcasts on this platform. I think you're really going to enjoy hearing all of these amazing testimonies from men of all ages and stages of life who have different pasts and unique perspectives about being kingdom men. And you ladies, now don't just think that this is only for men, because I sat in the room with these men listening and I was encouraged. So it's going to be so good. So stay tuned for these episodes to drop by subscribing to our YouTube channel at Beltway Park so you don't miss an episode. All 4 episodes will be released the 4 weeks, like 1 week at a time, leading up to boot camp. So guys, if you haven't registered for men's boot camp, click the link in the show notes to register. Beyond Sundays podcast. We hope y'all have an amazing day. And remember, God is always moving, and He's moving in your life too, beyond Sundays.